doing well during this COVID-19 pandemic, and I pray to God na sana maayos lang po kayo, pati yung mga pamilya nyo. And let us pray together as community and as entire humanity who is facing this pandemic. So, without much further ado, let me start my report. Basically, me and Brother James, our report will be the Medellin and the Octogesima Advenience. Brother James will focus on the Octogesima Advenience, and I will focus on the Medellin Conference of 1968. So my report will center on the Second Episcopal Conference of Latin America in 1968, which was held in Medellin, a city in Colombia. Well, as you all know, this city is famous because of an infamous drug cartel that was once wreaking havoc in the region, which is basically a hit TV series in Netflix entitled Narcos, featuring the life of the drug lord. I forgot the name. Featuring the life of the drug lord Pablo Escobar and his cronies. So, in 1968, there was a conference in Latin America in order to make documents or give resolution as a response to what will the Church of Latin America do with the teachings of Pope Paul VI on his Populorum Progressio. The conference, as it turns out, affects the Church in a way na not just those on the grassroots level, but also those who is also part of the higher up, the leaders of the church. The documents that were issued by the conference were like Vatican II. There were like a breath of fresh air. They are clear and powerful, and they really tackle the current system that is happening in Latin America during that time. And it is safe to say, I guess, that this is also the start of liberation theology. Amongst the many topics of the Episcopal Conference of Medellin, there are actually four main focus points of this report. The first will be structural injustice. Second is a poor church. Third is conscientization, and the fourth is the struggle for liberation. So, let us begin. First will be the structural injustice. Structural injustice is a term to pertain to the structure of society that uphold and foster dependency and poverty. In the many struggle of Latin America with situations of injustice and poverty, it finds itself facing what can be called an institutionalized violence. Poverty is not just something that happens, it is caused largely by human action of a kind that does violence to great masses of people. It is good to remember that injustice and poverty happens not just because of a particular action, but of a pattern of behavior that has for many years created a situation of internal colonialism and external colonialism. So basically, what the document is trying to say, in the whole area of Latin America, there is already injustice, and that injustice seems to be structural because it does not happen uh, so easily. How can I term it? It happens like, as it had said here, institutionalized. Yung parang meron na siyang structure. There is already ways or patterns on how this injustice is being done. And what is worse is that in this place, the rich are getting richer and the poor poorer. And that is uh, an example of structural injustice when the poor does not have the opportunity to be rich or to climb out of their poverty, wherein there is already the vicious cycle of poverty. uh, the hope they have seems to be lost because, well, they are already poor and they cannot climb up the ladder of society. And it is also very good to take note of the two terms here, which is internal colonialism and the external colonialism. For the internal colonialism, uh, it is the colonialism, well, we know that colonialism is bad based on our readings and our studies. We heard that colonialism happened when, example for our country, colonialism happened when first the Spaniards came, and then the Japanese, and then the Americans. Were in colonialism, they try to take, they we try to put something above our level of patriotism, like that. So instead of tangkilikin ang sariling atin, we like to buy things abroad, like that. That's colonialism. But internal colonialism, as my readings have said, is it's a very bad term. It's like putting up ghettos in a city wherein, well, you put the poor people in the ghetto and the rich people in the condos and the ranches, the high-end living. The external colonialism is what I have said earlier. You do not patronize your own product or your own country. Instead, you go to other countries, you buy their own products, even though you don't need them, or sometimes you need them, but instead of patronizing your stuff that comes out from your country, it seems like it's like cheap or bulok. So you buy from other countries. That is external colonialism. And then we go to the second part, the poor church. A poor church. A poor church is the cry for liberation from a million of poor people. It was deafening, actually, according to the document. The cry of the poor is deafening. That the church and her leaders heard it and they responded. The Medellin document of poverty of the church states that a distinction is made between meanings of poverty. It emphasized on this part, the conference emphasized that there is such thing as material poverty and then spiritual poverty. The conference says that material poverty is seen as evil, caused mainly by injustice. And then spiritual poverty is described as the attitude of opening up to God. Poverty as a commitment is a way in which one assumes voluntarily and lovingly the condition of the needy of this world in order to bear witness to the evil which it represents and to spiritual liberty after the example of Christ. What the document says here is that material poverty, the one you see all around us, the hardships, the slums, the ghettos, the poor who are already oppressed, it is caused by injustice and it is evil. Poverty, material poverty is evil. Although the the conference also states that there is such a thing as spiritual poverty. Spiritual poverty is opening up to God, letting God know what you need. And the document says that a poor church is a church that assumes and voluntarily and lovingly conditions the lovingly embraces the condition of this world, which is poor and needy, in order to bear witness which it represents, and to spiritual liberty. What it says is that the church who is poor stays poor not because they need to be poor or there are no contributions or money being given, but a poor church is a church that, what Pope Francis always tells us, goes into the peripheries. A church that smells like her sheep. A poor church is a church that smells like her sheep. A church that is poor denounces material poverty by all means. It does not approve of material poverty that is caused by injustice and sin. She, however, maintains what she preaches on spiritual poverty and lives by it. She is bound to material poverty as a commitment to the bishops of Latin America, recognizes their obligation to evangelize the poor, and that they should redistribute resources and personnel within the church itself so as to give effective preference to the poorest and the most needy sector. This preference is now called the preferential option of the poor. The bishops accepted what Medellin Conference stated, that they should have the duty of being in solidarity with those who are poor. The bishop says that solidarity with the poor means that we make ourselves their problems and their struggles smell like the sheep. That is a poor church. And then the third is conscientization, giving of consent. People become responsible for injustice by remaining passive, by failing to take courageous and effective action, for fear of the sacrifice and personal risk involved in doing so. The documents of Medellin favors a process of inspiring and organizing people, or the masa in our own language in Tagalog. Justice and peace will only prevail by means of dynamic action of awakening, conscientization, an organization of the masa who can then put pressure on public officials. Stimulations for justice from the grassroots, because what is envisioned is a political campaign and education for the masses of poor people to understand the cause of their poverty and the process of facilitating their work for improvement by putting pressure on authorities in order to attain social justice. A basic education is not limited to merely teaching people how to read and write, rather to enable them to become the conscious agent of their own integral development. It is significant that on the document on peace, the insistence of awakening the masses to political consciousness is found. This concretized that the Medellin Conference is committed to the view that there can be no genuine peace that is not based on social justice. So it may happen that an apparent peace built on oppression has to be put at risk in the effort to attain true peace and liberty. To this part, the conscientization is very clear, which in the church, as a teacher, should teach the masses, should teach the people, and the church should awaken the people, liberate the people from their emancipation in the vicious cycle of poverty. That the church, that the education that should be provided, that will be provided, is not just a simple education of knowing how to read or write or how to compute, knowing the basic knowledge needed to live, but also for people to know why they are poor and why they remain poor and what can they do in order to go out of this oppression called poverty. If we are going to look at this conscientization uh, in the far right, it's like revolution. It will, it will really step, uh, go to revolution, but this is not what is meant by the Medellin conference. They did not want revolution or any armed struggle. By all means, they are against that. Instead, what they want is just to educate people, to awaken them. And that is social justice. In order to awaken the people, for them to know that this is the status of life, this is how life works, and that they have the power to make their lives better. So, next to this conscientization is struggle for liberation. Uh, since the 1960s, many social scientists in Latin America had concluded that the word development was being used under the cover for exploitation and the creation of dependency. The economic development that took place in Latin American countries did not solve the problems of poverty. It instead made a wider gap between the rich and the poor. Because of this, the social scientists in Latin America demanded the use of liberation instead. For development became a word associated with the evil of exploitation, and that it cannot be rescued anymore. Almost all the church leaders present in the Medellin conference agreed to this point of view. This view helped them to emphasize their idea of liberation, which is seen in the third topic, the conscientization. Development conjures up an image of a nation harnessing natural forces more effectively and becoming organized in scientific and in agriculture and industry. In contrast, however, the word liberation suggests the shaking of an oppression imposed by other few people. The oppression might be the obvious political and economic control exercised by the colonial powers in the past. It may also mean the dependency and poverty created in Latin America by an unjust international economic order and maintained by the wealthy nations. It may also mean the domination of a rich and powerful minority in a country, or a combination of at least two elements mentioned above. Liberation is seen frequently in the Medellin Conference. Liberation has a very positive connotation, and it is likely linked to humanization. The Latin American bishops leave no doubt that they want to help the poor and oppressed to attain liberation. Medellin expresses that liberation does not equate with revolution. Revolution for them is unacceptable. It is an acceptable remedy for injustice because it gives rise to a more vile and sinister evil. Confronted with the starkness of poverty and harshness of oppression in Latin America, the urgency and pressure to take and stand on one side or the others, the bishops of Medellin felt that they cannot simply resort and take refuge in vagueness. Perhaps more than anything else, it is the clarity with which they present the options facing the church that's seen in hard light in the documents that Medellin produced. Medellin had put in the spotlight the issues on social justice and option for the poor. By doing this, they have posed a serious challenge not just on the Latin American church, but to the whole church as well. So, we see that the struggle for liberation is real in Latin American countries. Indeed, uh, if the country or the economy is only controlled by few rich people, then there will only be few people who will really be rich or be affluent in life. And most will be on the grassroots, on the below poverty line. And this happens when countries who are industrialized built their factories on Latin American countries. Uh, I think it was already discussed before the Fordism. Ford, the maker of engines on cars. This is a good example. They make car parts in poor countries and export them with a very high value, which is still happening today, not just in Latin America, but you can also see it in the Philippines, in China, in Thailand. Where in China, the very famous company Apple has a factory, and in China, people assemble Apple phones for a very cheap price, and they sell it in the market with a very hefty price. So I think that is an example of what the conference is talking about, that what they are speaking, what they are talking about before is still happening today. And still until today, the church must struggle for liberation of social justice. Not just those who are belonging to the church, our church, the Roman Catholic Church, but I guess the church should spearhead the struggle for liberation in the entire human race. Not just those belonging to our fold, but the entire people, the entire humanity is suffering. As an end note, a key element that links the idea of liberation and conscientization is awakening of the people. In order to liberate, we must awaken them. In order for them to be knowledgeable, in order for them to rise up, they must learn to wake up, they must learn. And by awakening the people through proper education, that does not only teach them to read and write, but more so, for them to understand why they are suffering. They should understand that their suffering does not only come from a certain element that are within their society, but to external factors that mask themselves in the form of development. As we see, development is a very bad word, and it's being used by many places. Development, which is, if we are going to really look at it now, development destroys. If you see a mall, then there is much more poverty in that place rather than a place that doesn't have a mall. If you see urbanization and many places, many workspaces, there will be more poverty on those places rather than those that does not have. Because development does not mean that everybody in that place will be rich. No, development destroys. So with that, brothers, thank you for listening to me talking for like half an hour. I pray that you all have a good day, and I hope that we will see each other soon in seminary, and let us continue to pray for each other and for the entire world that this COVID-19 will be finished or cured. There will already be a vaccine. So thank you so much, and goodbye.